Okay. I hope you enjoyed that. Saw a couple actors I'm sure that you're familiar with. And the point of watching that is just to get an idea of what Charles Baxter's essay is about. He uses the word inflection, but we can just think of it in terms of that video as emphasis. Which word in a phrase or in a sentence gets emphasized? In this case by actors, but Charles Baxter is going to turn it into inflection in fiction writing, where there are not actors, but there is dialogue on the page. And think of how the emphasis given to one word creates a different meaning or has a different effect than if it was given to another word. So we even see in that video, I think 7 different words emphasized out of the 8 or so that are in the phrase. And each of them carries with it a different reason or a different purpose. And there's even one point in the video when one of the actors says, there's no point to emphasizing the or. And so it goes into these actors having a discussion and having an argument about which is the best word to emphasize. Depends on what you're trying to communicate. It depends on what you're trying to get the audience to feel. And this is what Baxter's argument becomes about. Of course, Baxter starts just with the very simple fact that emphasis is first realistic, that when we speak, we emphasize certain words over another. So he calls it inflection is the breath of life. It creates reality. It makes it seem like someone's actually talking. But then the secondary goal to Charles Baxter's essay is, okay, not only in fiction does inflection in dialogue make it seem like the dialogue is real and that the audience believes that the dialogue is really happening, but also that within that emphasis there is particular meaning that's being created. So a quick discussion of the to be or not to be would be to point out that if you emphasize not, to be or not to be, that is the question. Hamlet is putting more emphasis on the negative aspect, and we need to remember that this phrase is essentially Hamlet in the play considering whether or not to commit suicide. So it's a very serious question. And by emphasizing not, there seems to be the indication that he is thinking more deeply about what it means to not be, to be dead, to go through with the act. So it's a little bit more sad, it's a little bit more potentially even gruesome, with an emphasis on not. Now if you emphasize the be, to be or not to be, there's emphasis on life, of being, of maybe the indication that he's going to choose first, that he's not going to go through this. So that's a nice little distinction right there. Of course, we can say when the one actor emphasizes that, to be or not to be, that is the question. There's an emphasis on how important the decision is. That is the only question that matters. There's an emphasis on the significance of the difference between life and death. And so it has a different effect on the reader and a different effect on the meaning of the phrase. So this is what the video is getting at, but more importantly, this is what Baxter is getting at, is that inflection or emphasis on certain words and phrases makes fiction and acting realistic, but then secondarily, it creates specific purpose depending on which language you emphasize. So that's just the overall purpose of Baxter. We're not going to talk too deeply about that, but it will show up, of course, in the problem-making section because he's going to be developing a problem about inflection and about how without it, we don't believe in a story that's being told, and that is his whole argument, that we have to make a story believable. So I'm going to pull up Baxter essay. Just get there. You're really something, inflection in the breath of life, and just point out a couple things. And as I said earlier, I just want to talk about the problem-making portion of this essay and what you could learn from it and some considerations you have in writing your own. So let's give you some scope first, just to understand how long the problem-making section is. It begins on page 1, keeps going into the third page, and more or less ends here. So when there's a break is a nice indication that there's a change in focus. And even if we looked at what happens after the break, he starts making definitions about what inflection is. Inflection, which is the tone in which something is said, particularly when applied to extreme events or circumstances, is important. It signals belief. All this stuff that's definition of what inflection is, that's responding to the problem. But pretty much up until 2.5 pages, he's developing a problem. And we're going to look at how he does it and see if you might consider imitating how he does it. So, as you noticed when you read the essay, he does it by telling a story. He does it by telling a story about taking his family to a roadside attraction called Dinosaur World. And it's the story of a tour guide at Dinosaur World who, on their tour, doesn't seem to believe in the story he himself is telling. And because he doesn't believe the story he himself is telling, the audience doesn't believe it either. And the story captures with such specific detail how him and his family laugh at the ride operator's description of, I think, the Tyrannosaurus Rex, and when he uses words like ferocious and such. Let's see if we could find that. Fearsome, not ferocious. They're laughing, he's yawning, and they have this problem, essentially, that they're encountering. And the problem is that they paid for this ride so that they can encounter some thing that Baxter is calling the willing suspension of disbelief. They know that the dinosaurs aren't really alive at Dino World. They know that they're fake, and they know that they're constructed replicas. But they still went anyway to be entertained and to learn about dinosaurs, specifically with their kid. But what Baxter is telling us through this story is that they didn't believe a single thing. And the reason they didn't believe it is because the speaker himself didn't believe it. He had no inflection or emphasis in his voice. It's almost as if he said things in one line. We're about to go into the land that existed before time began. Monotone. Let me know if you have any questions. Monotone. So there's no emphasis, so they don't know to not only believe the story is being told, but they also don't know the particular purpose of what's being said either. He contrasts this, of course, against something that he imagines happens behind closed doors, where the tour guide does use inflection. And he imagines him saying, so they're like sitting there, and I'm like doing the tour, and man, these assholes begin to, laugh. And geez, it just totally freaks me out. I tell you, man, Dinosaur World is the job from hell. You know what I'm saying? So on and so forth. And so this is probably something very realistic. We have this teenager who doesn't care about his job, thinks it's stupid, but when he's with his friends and when he's explaining something or telling a story that he cares about, he emphasizes and inflects certain language to make it more believable, to make it more realistic, to make it more animated potentially or dramatic. And he also puts emphasis on certain words to help his audience feel the purpose he's trying to convey. And so that's a nice comparison there. But still, the bottom line is that we're in a story still. Up until the end of this paragraph and the beginning of this one on the next page, it's all this long story, what we call anecdote, of a day at Dinosaur World, that he encounters a problem with the speaker of this ride operator and how he speaks. That is a way to introduce a problem about inflection in general and how it relies to fiction. Now, what's interesting is that this story has nothing to do with fiction writing. It simply has to do with inflection. So it's an interesting dynamic that his problem making develops not in terms of the overall and general topic of the essay, which if we took that in our own kind of understanding of our assignment would be poetry, he focuses on a specific technical skill of fiction, inflection, and what the problem is with that, and what problem he sees not only in fiction, but also in just daily communication. So it's this wonderful anecdote that introduces the problem specific not to fiction, but to the technical skill he's going to focus on in the rest of the essay. So I wanted you to see that, to see how that works, is you might have a story specific to tone and diction, specific to lineation, specific to potentially even sound, a story that you yourself or the protagonist of, or you are just part of and observant to this other problem someone else had that you might be able to tell for your problem-making section. He then turns it into more direct statements, and in this next paragraph, the bottom line is he said the problem is that he was supposed to hypnotize us a little bit, but he didn't. And he says this is the technical problem of narratives concerning fantasy materials. He was supposed to pretend to be interested, and he had to be the first person to believe. He had to perform his belief. All the information about dinosaurs was secondary. What I also like about this problem making that he's identifying is that there's a focus on how something is said, not what is said, and how something is said makes it more believable, makes it more convincing, makes it more effective. But he wraps up and directly states what the problem was after the story ends. And then he finally moves on into his argument. So we could go into detail about what the problem is, and where it comes from, and what are the causes of it. And they're specific, of course, to this ride operator. They come from his own cultural or societal standing. He's a teenager. He wants to play football. He's forced to do a job that he doesn't care to do to make money over the summer. Because of that background, it affects the way he engages in his job. He doesn't believe in it, and therefore a problem is produced. He prefers to play football over tell stories, so on and so forth. He prefers to use vulgar language instead of proper social language, so on and so forth. When we start digging into a problem, the more we understand this story. So, it's a very basic idea, but I want you to see. Sorry. I wanted you to see that one way you can develop a problem-making section is with a small and or extended anecdote in which you encountered the problem the first time, are currently encountering the problem, or the way that other people have encountered the problem in story form, and use those 3 questions of how to develop a problem to develop specifically where it came from and how it developed its influence to get to the place where it is today. So that's just something to consider. I'm going to follow up this video with another one about the most misread poem in America to talk about another way to develop the problem-making section. This was with ethos or storytelling or anecdote, and the next one's going to be about logos using fact. And look forward to that, and I'll see you soon.